with my January wrap-up part 2. First, I'm gonna start with the statistics. I previously made goal of doing statistics after each month so that I would keep track of my reading preferences. Although I will talk about the books that I read in the second half of January, my statistics will include the whole month. So let's get on with the statistics. In January 2020, I read a total of 12 books. 4 of them were historical fiction, 3 of them were fantasy, 2 of them were non-fiction, and I read 1 science fiction, 1 romance, 1 comedy book. These 12 books amounted to 2,815 pages. 3 books were less than 100 pages. 3 books were between 100 and 200 pages. 2 books were between 200 and 300 pages. 1 book was between 300 and 400 pages. 2 books were between 400 and 500 pages. And 1 book was between 500 and 600 pages. My average page number per book was 234.5 pages. As for the publishing days, I had a good variety of books. I read 4 books published between 2010 and 2015, 2 books between 2015 and 2019, 1 book each from 1990s, 1960s, 1910s, 1800s, and a book actually before Christ. Among those books, 3 of them can be considered classics, and 1 of them can be considered a modern classic. As for the original language of the books, 7 books were in English, 2 books were in Turkish, and I read 1 each in Spanish, French, and Latin. Among those 12 books, 7 of them were novels, 3 of them were novellas, 1 of them was a play, and 1 of them was a public address talk. As for target audience of the books, 8 books were for adults, 3 books were for middle grade audience, and 1 book was geared towards young adults. Format that I read them, 7 books were e-books, I read 3 paperbacks, and I listened to 2 of the books as an audiobook format. My last statistics are the ratings. I rated 5 books 8 out of 10, 3 books 7, 1 book 5, and 1 book 10 out of 10. My average rating for those books was 7.33 out of 10. So those were the statistics of the books, 12 books that I read in January 2020. I had previously wrapped up the first 6 books. I will put the link down below. I'm going to wrap up the books starting with the 7th book that I read in the month. The first book that I'm going to talk about is Frome by Edith Wharton. I read this as a part of the Back of the Bookshelf book club in Instagram. This is a romance classic, and it tells the uncanny love story between a man and her wife's cousin. I gave this book 6 out of 10 because I really did not like the characters, so their love story was not effective for me. It was supposed to be tragic, and maybe if I had connected with the characters, I would have found it tragic, but I really disliked the characters. Although I had no problems with the writing style, this book did not affect me at all. The second book that I'm going to talk about was actually a result of the decision that I made after watching Julie's Agatha Christie Booktag. In one of the questions, she mentioned many non-fiction books about Agatha Christie, and I searched through my Bookmate application in iPad, and I found Agatha Christie, A Woman of Mystery. It was a stage 2 book, so it was a very short one, and the writing and the language was very easy, but I really enjoyed how the writer summed up Agatha Christie's life, and it touched upon many personal things that I knew some of them, but I didn't know some of them as well. So it was a good example of a short biography. That's why I gave it 7 out of 10. The next book that I finished was The Snowflower and the Secret Fan by Lisa C. I really enjoyed this book, and I read it as a part of Krista's Goodreads Readalong page. The book tells the story of a lifelong friendship between two Chinese women in 1980s China. I gave the book 8 out of 10. I really enjoyed the parts about where the author describes the historical significance, historical period, and the details of the Chinese life in that period, and the description of the general environment, the cities, and all the other things. But unfortunately, except for the foot binding scenes, which was really hard to read, by the way, I did not connect with the characters. Although I admired their friendship through the years, I did not really feel that friendship. I felt like it was much more telling than showing us in the book. But because of those wonderful descriptions of the time period and how it covers the general idea, I think the book deserved an 8 out of 10. Next book that I read was also historical fiction, and I read this book as a part of Stacking the Series challenge. It was the next book in Phillippa Gregory's Tudor court series, The Boleyn Inheritance. This book tells the life story of Henry VIII's fourth and fifth wife, from the perspective of the wives, Anne of Cleves and Catherine Howard. There is an additional character who is the chambermaid of both of these queens, and she is also the sister-in-law of the former queen, Anne of Boleyn. I enjoyed the book very much, and I gave it 8 out of 10. I really enjoyed the content of Phillippa Gregory's novels in the series. She talks about the court intrigues, the love stories, the backstabbing, and the duplicity and the hypocrisy of many men in that area, actually, and some of the women as well. I think it's a very engaging story. But because she makes so many research, her books are sometimes unnecessarily long. This was not the case for this book, although there were some repetitions because these three women were telling the same period from their own perspectives. I think the tempo was much more better than her previous books. I really enjoyed this series, and I'm very eager to finish this series as a part of my Stacking the Series challenge this year. And the next book that I'm going to wrap up is actually the book that makes my statics very interesting. I listened to this book in audiobook in Turkish, The Trial and Death of Socrates by Plato. This book was written in 400 BC. It was originally written in Latin. It is the public address talk of Socrates that he gave for defending himself in the trial before his death sentence. It was recommended to me by one of my real life book club friends, and I enjoyed the book very much. It was easy to listen since it was in Turkish. And I found Socrates to be very clever, but actually he was very old and he knew that he was going to get that sentence. So he wanted to make sure that the public understood him very well. And his defense was actually not towards the judges, but towards the people who lived in Athens at that time. And the last book that I finished in December was actually a book that was originally written in Spain, and I tried to find the English translation, but it did not have an English translation. I read the book in Turkish. It's called Jules Verne Okuru, meaning that the reader of Jules Verne. It's a historical fiction book, and it tells the story of the friendship between Nino, who was a 9-year-old son of a gendarme and a stranger who comes to his town in times of Franco's dictatorship in Spain. Nino tries to escape from harsh truths by reading many books, and especially Jules Verne books. When I first read the synopsis of the book, I was very excited to read this book because it told about a time period that I did not know very much. And by reading this book, I learned about the time period quite well. But I really had trouble with the writing style of the book. Although this book is clearly towards adult audience, the story is told from the eyes of the 9-year-old child. He tells the story in the future as an adult, but I don't think that the sentences and the feelings that he describes would be the description of that 9-year-old boy in that time, because it was the sentences were so sophisticated. I don't know if it makes sense as regards to his telling it in the future, but this was a big issue for me, so that's why I gave the book 6 out of 10. So those were the books that I read for the second half of January 2020. I think this was a fairly good month for my reading. So please comment down below, have you read any of the books that I've mentioned in my wrap-up? What did you think of my statistics? Did you like them? Also, please like and subscribe. Hope to see you very soon. Bye! As for Turkish Word of the Day, since Boleyn Inheritance was one of the favorite books of this wrap-up, I'm going to choose Inheritance as our Turkish Word of the Day. Inheritance means miras in Turkish, and miras is our Turkish Word of the Day. Have a good day!